But thank you all for joining today's webinar, the fifth in the series. And today we're joined by Bruce Macphee. Now, Bruce Macphee is the senior agronomist at ASTMA and has been with the association since 2016. So his career started as an apprentice on golf courses at Patterson River, before working his way through a number of bowling clubs and those sorts of things, and then landing at Peninsula Country Club, where he was the assistant superintendent before rising to the superintendent for a number of years, following which he had about a 10-year stint as the senior lecturer in sports turf management, teaching the diploma sports turf management at Chisholm. Following that, he moved over to Evergreen, where he was looking after specifications, design, construction of sports fields, grounds, school facilities, council facilities, golf courses, and also racetracks, and responsible for the project of designing the Pakenham Racecourse. And then after which point he joined our team at the association, as I mentioned, in 2016, where he is the senior agronomist consulting to golf courses around benchmarking, around agronomic principles and management practices, as well as being the senior consultant to the AFL. So to talk to us about determining priorities and using data to determine benchmarking,
Thanks, Mark. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for your time today. I'll just share my screen with you, and hopefully that shouldn't take too long. All right, I think everyone should have that up now. When putting this talk together today, I thought about the challenges that we're all currently facing, and the situation's really different for everyone. Some clubs have had not much effect at all. Others have been on reduced staff. I think there's been a common thread, though, that there's been reduced income across the board, and that probably increased use where people have been allowed to play golf. So that doesn't necessarily equate to an increased income. So what I thought we'd look at today is navigating through identifying some of the factors on your golf course that can help you make the right decisions with budgets being tight, and also how to communicate that information to your boards and committees using data. I'll just get this together. So, as I said, while some clubs have been struggling, others have been doing well. What I'm going to talk about today, not all of it will be applicable to every person's individual situation, but I hope you can all take away something from this today. The shot up on the screen at the moment is actually from a club in India that I've been working with for the last couple of years, and it's been interesting communicating with them over the last few months that they've been in full lockdown with no golf, and just setting what's an immaculate course up for essentially a shutdown and minimal maintenance during this period. But fortunately, I think they're back up and have golf playing again now. All right, what I wanted to look at was one of the things that I think's changed over the last 10, 15 years is superintendents and people's general attitudes towards maintaining golf course. For many years, or in times gone by, we're all operating in separate silos where the clubhouse was one section, the golf course was another, and there wasn't a real great understanding between the two. And I think successful clubs, they look at everything holistically, where every part of the golf club is important to the overall outcome of running a successful business. What we're going to look at today is from an agronomic perspective, looking at benchmarking the course, where it sits with other clubs in the area, how to identify the standards and objectives that you should have, and setting appropriate maintenance levels for your club, because every club is different. and communicating that to the board and members so they have a greater understanding of potentially what the limitations of your course or club are. I gave a presentation to the General Managers Association last year on a very similar subject. And one of the questions I asked them was, what drives the success of one club over another? That within an area you might have one club that's particularly successful and others that seem to struggle a bit. That can be based on the location, the topography, whether there's spectacular views of the course, the overall quality of the surfaces, the prestige of being a member at that club, the ease of access, whether it's an easy, quick 9 on the way home from work, so that's location in a different way. The general friendliness of the staff and good service will keep people coming back. And consistently good playing surfaces, where a club's reputed to have great playing surfaces, winter and summer, people will want to go and play. If they don't have to traipse through mud, it's far more attractive than knowing at the end of 4 or 5 holes your feet are going to be soaked and going to be like that for the rest of your round. All of these things come back to generating income for the club. Consistent high quality playing surfaces are the key, and that's what we'll be looking at today. These come from regular maintenance in ensuring that you're maintaining optimum growing conditions for the turf and for golf. It's a fine balance between the two, and setting appropriate maintenance standards, knowing that what you're setting to it is actually achievable and sustainable, that you're not setting the bar too high and it's unachievable year round. Providing adequate renovations, ensuring that you've got suitable machinery and equipment, well-trained staff and operators, detailed maintenance programs, fertility programs, the irrigation management set up properly, and of course the available budget to do the work. Another question that I've discussed with a few people over the years is what drives the quality of a golf course? There's multiple inputs into that. Golfers' expectation that can sometimes be unrealistic. Golf course superintendents also drive the quality and condition that they strive for. Quite often there's a little bit of competition between clubs to ensure that you're doing as well as the course up the road, but it's quite often where we're unfairly compared to another course without a full understanding of the available budget, the limitations of the actual property, the soil types, etc. And often we go into a golf course and we see that there's disproportionate maintenance standards or expectations set, and they just simply don't manage or match the limitations of the course itself or the budget available to do that work. And so going through and setting up a benchmarking will give you a good idea of what your course is capable of. There's a number of factors that influence the ability of a course or its condition. They vary from course to course, so that's why it's very difficult to compare one course to another. You're not always comparing apples with apples. You have things like local site conditions, the soil types, the available water, the quality of that water, the climate of that location, your topography, the age of the facility, older courses with extensive thatch layers and so on are far more difficult to produce a good quality surface. And budget also comes into that. But we'll look at budgets a little bit later. Right. The term benchmarking itself can be loosely determined or defined as a means of measuring a set criteria against a set standard. In 2010 to 2013, I think AGSATEC undertook a benchmarking study on a range of courses throughout the country, and that determined a set of parameters of where different clubs could actually aim for or where they should be operating. And it's important to measure in any business how you're travelling along and how you compare to your competitors. Give the ability to look at what's achievable and sustainable within your facility, and what are your course quality objectives. How are you determining what the objectives of the course are? Supers quite often can be intimidated by undertaking this process. It's not about judging the superintendent. It's really about collecting facts and looking at the situation and the limitations the course is under and how they can be best managed. It's quite often at the end of the process quite rewarding for the superintendent, because they get to understand what a great job they're doing and also clearly defines the limitations that they're up against. So, as I've previously mentioned, there's so many variables between golf clubs that it's very difficult to compare one golf course to another. And it's far more beneficial to actually determine what is the potential for your golf course. What works, what doesn't, what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses of your course? What things make something work and what are probably impediments. So soil types, topography, construction methods can all have an influence. The photo there is of a great course that has an incredible number of rounds with golf carts. I think there's 60 to 70,000 rounds a year, and about 90% of those are in golf carts. So a big challenge for the superintendent with the soil types to maintain reasonable quality turf. So benchmarking is also the process of identifying the factors that inhibit improvement or consistency of playing surfaces. So is your irrigation system uniform and reliable? Is it up to the job? Is thatch an issue? You can have seasonal issues where you might have greens that really struggle either in winter or summer. So a benchmarking process ideally should take place at multiple times through the year to get an idea of your seasonal variations or issues you may have. The influence shade may have, poor construction, the age of various constructions. Many golf courses have golf greens that are all of varying ages and require different maintenance and practices to be implemented. Can also identify what areas may need reconstruction and variation of maintenance practices required. Some of the elements that we look at when we are benchmarking a course, there's things that can be assessed at any time, things like the thatch levels, the organic content of the thatch. It's one point to measure the depth of the thatch, but then to look at how much organic matter is in that. Some golf clubs and golf greens have quite an extensive thatch layer, but they also have a extensive renovation and top dressing practice. So the thatch is quite diluted and not having a major effect on the quality. What factors are affecting the turf performance? Surface hardness, green speed. Ideally, they need to be assessed at least once a season. So you're getting an idea throughout the year how things are performing and whether those seasonal variations are having an effect. Surface smoothness. It can be quite a subjective measure. There's tools that can measure the surface smoothness, which we'll look at later. Hydraulic conductivity as well needs to be assessed each season. See whether in winter it's prohibitive to the amount of water actually moving through the surface, or in summer you can have issues as well. Golf courses do change throughout the year. Their playability, And to me, most golfers understand this and accept it, but it's changing that mindset in some clubs too, to understand that we can't be in tournament mode 12 months of the year. The benchmarking process, generally courses, from what the AGCSA study, courses can be generally categorised into three broad categories. A basic quality public access golf course, a mid to high quality public or private access course, and then you have your very high quality elite clubs or tier 1 clubs. From the research conducted by AgTech in years gone by, the generalised outcome was for public courses, green speeds between 6'6" and 10 feet, mid to high private courses, 8 to 12 feet, and elite clubs, 8'6" to 13 feet. Going along with that, surface hardness, which was measured with a cleg hammer, 68 to 100 gravities for a public course, 78 to 102 for mid, private and public, and 83 to 111 for elite courses. Looking at these figures, it doesn't mean a public course can't be profitable. It may not have the facilities or the input to present the course as an elite club. You need to work out where your course fits in with the local competition. Are you targeting the right demographic for your club, and getting people in and through the door. Some other work that was done previously, looking at the three different categories of clubs, there were some comparisons on inputs as far as maintenance, where a basic public club may only cut their greens 3 to 4 times a week, as opposed to 7 days a week for an elite club. And also the mowing height can be 3 to 4 mil versus sub 3 mil for an elite club. Going through this, you can also see mowing equipment, the labouring required for walk behinds as opposed to a triplex can be a massive impost onto a club for costs. Dusting, power control, quite often on a basic public course, it's not really a priority. Many clubs have fantastic greens with power. Today, with seed head suppressants and so on, some incredible surfaces can be produced. So not necessarily something that you're going to want to follow if you have a low budget. But looking at all of these, and this will be available for people if they wish to have a look at some of this information in further detail, you can see there'd be a big difference in budget and staff requirements from a basic course to an elite course there in presenting all of that. These all come at an additional cost, and the budget would be significantly different also. Getting on to data collection. To help with the discussion or argument of identifying what is a priority on the course and what works need to be undertaken to ensure you have consistent playing surfaces, collecting data provides a solid scientific background or measurement rather than just an opinion. And quite often, speaking to superintendents and being a former superintendent, dealing with committees can be one of the most difficult jobs. Quite often the superintendent is the expert in the room, but most often the committee can be made up of people that are generally considered peers of the community or have important roles, and generally aren't they're used to being the smartest person in the room, and to have a superintendent come in and suggest different may be difficult for them to accept at times. So having scientific information and data to back up your argument can override an opinion, and you can give some decent facts to the matter. So some of the information you can collect on golf greens, botanical composition, so looking at the percentage of poa in the green or other weeds, can be done annually, even biannually is probably better, even quarterly. Your thatch depth, that could be done annually. It's a good point also, which we'll look at later, is looking at the organic content of that thatch. Your average root depth, moisture content as well, these are all tied into each other. That extensive thatch layers don't often encourage a deep, extensive root system, hold higher moisture levels in the upper surface of the green, promote soft surfaces, lower green speeds, bumpy surfaces due to ball marking and machinery traffic, etc. Measuring the organic content or loss on ignition. We have a number of clubs that do this regularly on their greens to monitor their renovation programs, and it's a very good way of identifying just how much influence that thatch layer is having. You can see that picture there, which was taken from that green that was flooded in winter. There's some extensive thatch layers and some sand layers in there, and that's really preventing water getting through into the sand layers below. And the renovation processes that have taken place really haven't been breaking through that thatch layer to get down to the sand below. Influence of shade is another thing that can be taken throughout the year. See just how much of an impact that's having on various greens and their quality. This is from a survey we conducted on one course, and collecting the data and then putting it into a format such as a graph that's then very easily communicated to boards and members. It's a really good visual tool. You can see here the thatch depth, that two greens highlighted had extensive thatch layers in comparison to the rest of the course. And in turn, then you had increased moisture levels in those two greens in the surface, and also a reduced surface hardness on those greens. So very clear there to identify that there's two greens which would be a priority over all others to be reconstructed. Right, measuring organic content through loss on ignition. Generally, when we look at golf greens, we'll test in 20mm increments, and depending on the depth and the extent of your thatch layer, quite often we'll just do the top 20 and then 20 to 40mm. And that'll give you an indication of where the most extensive organic matter buildup is and how to target your renovation practices. Regardless of the climate, typically greater than 4% organic matter in the top 20mm of the profile becomes a bit of a red flag that you're going to have issues with lower oxygen levels within the soil, increased surface water retention, so softer greens, reduced hydraulic conductivity, and increased ball marking. The next slide here is some work I've done with a racetrack that I've been involved with for quite a few years now, where we've monitored the organic matter content of the track in 5 locations over the last 5 years. You can see while it's not perfect or an exact science, there's a clear trend there that in the first few years we weren't renovating enough, and we adjusted the renovation program. Once we got to around 10%, we noticed there was an organic content in the thatch layer. We noticed there was a distinct difference in the performance of the track, and it deteriorated slightly, particularly under wet conditions. So the decision was made to increase the renovations, and the track slowly reduced its organic content to a manageable level, and they have quite an extensive maintenance program now, which just by this information alone, we're able to clearly show that what we're doing is working. And this sort of thing can be done on a golf green quite simply to get your idea of, are you renovating, and is your program suitable enough? Right, moisture sensors, moisture probes. There's a range of different products on the market. The Field Scout, TDR, or the Pogo. Most of the new ones now have GPS technology, where you can also create a map showing the distribution of moisture content within a surface. The TDR probe from Field Scout also has varying lengths probes. We use these in some of our assessments to highlight the influence of the thatch layer. And by using varying length probes, we can produce a map or graph like this, where you can see 38mm probes, the top 40mm, the moisture content sitting around 50% there. And there's a distinct reduction when you're looking at the average over that whole length of a 120mm probe, that the thatch layer is influencing increased moisture in the surface. The hardness is up there on the top as well, and you can see clearly that where there's a lower moisture content, the hardness is increased. So a direct effect of moisture being held in the upper surface. Another one here where we've just highlighted the two depths. And these graphs are quite easy to produce through Excel, just with collecting data. And if anyone ever needs a hand, they can certainly ring me to help with this sort of thing. I've highlighted in red there where the ideal moisture content should be for a golf green, between 15 and 25%. It's not realistic for many instances, but it gives you a good guide and can show where there's differences. And you can certainly see there, say 24 hours after irrigation, where the moisture's sitting and the influence the thatch layer may be having. Surface hardness is something we measure with half-kilo domed head using Clegg hammer, and it's measured in gravities. You also have the True Firm, another product which can be used. Has slightly different reading measures, but our preferred tool is the Clegg hammer, and gives you a good indication of the surface hardness and gives you a number to go by. Most studies done around the world use this product, so it's very good if you're looking at other data to see where you're sitting, that you've got something as a direct reference. Green surface assessment for smoothness. There's a range of products on the market. It's possibly one of the most important factors of a putting surface, and there's many superintendents out there that are dealing with substandard growing conditions and still managing to produce fantastic smooth putting surfaces. And this can give you an idea, I guess, of how your systems or how your surfaces are going. Things such as the parimeter or the trueness meter, which can be used to measure the vertical displacement of a ball. It has either a wheel or a ball in there that rolls, and it measures how much that bounces or chatters up and down, as well as any movement lateral deviation, which would be considered trueness of the surface. I know as a super, I used to quite often watch golfers putt and watch their ball rather than them actually playing, to get an idea of how smooth the greens were after rolling, and just watching that last little bit of the ball before it stops to see how true the greens are. Another device up there in the top left-hand corner, which we have, is the holing out device. And a stint meter also, whilst it's not measuring the smoothness, it can be used as another device to support collecting information. Not something though I think you want to go around every day broadcasting your green speeds to everyone, because it can put you in a rod for your own back, giving speeds to everyone daily. But these bits of equipment, bar the stint meter, are often quite expensive and probably prohibitive to buy, but they are available through a range of people that can bring them out to course and utilise them with you. Shade is also another factor, which affects turf quality and the potential of various areas. Many clubs we deal with have shade issues and also difficulty with being able to remove trees or thin canopies based on local council laws. It's something that can be very difficult to manage. There's different turf grasses out there now, such as zoysia, which seem to be performing reasonably well in shady conditions when compared to other warm season grasses. But typically shade will influence things like the amount of moisture held in the canopy temperature, soil temperature. So we get reduced growth rates in shaded areas, a thinning of turf density. The shade also influences the drying time of the surface and therefore also disease presence. So putting some numbers or figures around shade and how many hours of shade your areas receive, there's a number of tools out there. A great one which is available as an app for your phone is the Sunseeker app. And you can set that up to take photos of your course, and it'll actually plot, got you the winter solstice there, and various times of the day and where the sun will be through winter. And you can get an idea then of how much shade areas are receiving or how much sun they're receiving. There's also another tool that can go along with this called the Watchdog, which you can place out on the surface itself, and that'll measure the PAR light. So you can work out just how much light your areas are receiving. But the Sunseeker app itself is quite reasonable. I think it's about $70 to purchase as an app for your phone, and can be a very useful tool in highlighting just where the issues are to boards and members. Part of your benchmarking and collecting all this data, you also need to have an idea of what the philosophy of the course is, or how the club want the course presented. And creating a philosophy document or some statements around how the course should be presented are very valuable, so everyone is on the same page. And you can get some management objectives set up for your varying surfaces, greens, tees, fairways, certainly out of play areas as well. They add significant value as conservation areas to your club. And setting those up for aesthetics as well can also increase the enjoyment of the experience of playing golf. When setting up these parameters, you need to make sure that they're realistic, sustainable, and fit within your budget and available resources and the environment you're working in. A statement for greens may be as simple as greens are to be presented in the best possible condition each day, according to weather and the current available resources. You don't want to have something like the greens must be a minimum of 11 feet on the stint metre year-round with less than 5% power annua. You'd be really making a rod for your own back there. So they've got to be achievable and realistic, but also provide you with a bit of wiggle room for seasonal variations. When developing a course philosophy document, it's important to get input from all stakeholders. If the course has an architect, they can provide some valuable input into how the course should look and feel. Golfers' expectations. You have varying standards of golfers. We can't keep everyone happy, we know that, but getting input on what they would expect, the competition in the area, how that's going to fit in with where you're targeting, and of course, most important, the superintendent has input into what is actually achievable given the budget and the conditions that you're working with. So creating that document, and then also having some benchmarking done to provide where you want to have your course condition. You can then start to work out a budget to fulfill and produce the desired course conditions. This will also help you develop the priorities for the golf course. Your philosophy document should be probably part of your 5-year plan for the course, and also state and highlight what things need to be addressed or reconstructed during that period. Often, the very thing that attracts golfers to a golf club is overlooked, which is the actual golf course. And clubs will persist for many years with poor quality greens or substandard irrigation systems. They're not seeing the superintendent and the staff working multiple hours overtime during summer to keep the course alive. But they may also then go ahead and improve the clubhouse by putting new carpet and things like that in, which, if you've got a good philosophy document and you've highlighted the important factors that need to be addressed on the course, part of that can also be looking at the rest of the facility as well. So things can be put in a proper priority list, and you're working around the things that need to be achieved for the actual course, which is the thing that brings people and money through the door. Developing a budget, we'll look at that shortly, but ideally it should reflect the maintenance requirements of the course based on the objectives and the standards that you wish to maintain. So you need to ensure that you have adequate resources and budget to maintain the course and make sure that what you're doing is realistic and sustainable. Some of the benchmarking on fairways. Typically, we'd look at not all fairways, but in depth, but any problem ones or a couple of good ones and a couple of poor ones, and gauge the difference between them. Look at botanical composition. If there's weed issues, varying types of couch grass, or whether they're cool season fairways, thatch depth and accumulation, organic content of that thatch, any high traffic areas and compaction levels. Soil penetrometer gauge can be used in various areas to gauge compaction and how deep it is. Quite often you'll have design issues with bunkering and greens where they'll funnel traffic into concentrated areas, which become problematic. That may be something where you look at with the architect to redesign those areas if required, to encourage wear to be spread out evenly. Irrigation uniformity is important across the entire course. Many systems now will provide you with how many mil per hour the system's delivering. Over such a large, extensive area of a golf course, what's on a computer and what actually happens out on the course can be two different things, particularly with older systems. It's worthwhile assessing your irrigation uniformity to ensure you are getting even application of water. The influence of trees and shade on golf courses. Quite often where there's shade, you'll also have tree root competition in the same area. This fairway on the picture here, you can see there's some areas of drought stress within the surface, which is directly related to the trees on the left-hand side, which unfortunately aren't in the photo. Drainage issues are also another thing to assess, that areas with heavy thatch or heavy soils may require close spacing drainage to ensure that you have a dry surface throughout the winter periods and that the course is playable. Looking at distribution uniformity, how evenly water is applied on a fairway or golf green. You can do this easily by setting out catch cups and setting your irrigation system for, say, 20 minutes. From there, you can also work out your distribution uniformity, which in the given time we've got, that's another talk. I think John Forrest did one last year. Some of you may have seen. You can also work out your precipitation rate, or how much water in millimetres is being applied per hour. This is really important rather than basing your irrigation timing or applications on minutes, you need to know how many mil per hour your system's delivering in various areas. Courses I've worked on in the past, we've had variations from 14 millimetres an hour on one green was the lowest, up to 25 millimetres an hour on the highest. So setting them all for the same time is going to give them completely different amounts of water. So it's a very worthwhile process to go through, and you can make some incredible savings in water just by applying the same amount of water to each of your surfaces. Looking at fees and assessment of fees, once again, botanical composition, thatch depth and the influence of thatch on the quality of the surface, the organic content. Quite often thatch isn't such an issue on tees because of regular divoting, but you can also have issues there with the total area of the green and whether that's adequate or not. Irrigation uniformity. Quite often tees are very irregular shapes and they're quite difficult to set irrigation up on. The influence of trees and shade can have a dramatic effect on the ability of the tee to recover from damage. Tree encroachment further down the fairway. Quite often I'll look at heavily treed courses and you'll notice on the tee that everyone tees off from one side of the tee based on trees further down the fairway and opening up the shot, particularly for right-handers. You might find that you have very uneven wear on the tee based on tree encroachment further down the fairway. I've got some rough guidelines there from Beard on the total surface area per 1,000 rounds for tees. Typically 20 square metres plus per 1,000 rounds for a par 3 tee where there's more regular divoting. Par 4s and par 5s, 10 to 15 square metres. And any of those, if the tee is affected by shade in any way, should be 50% larger again. So it's a good way of working out whether your tees are adequate in their size and the work that needs to be done to, particularly on par 3 tees, which seem to wear out quite quickly if they're warm season grass and the recovery is slow over the winter period. Maintenance requirements. This is where the superintendent's role is essential in setting up your course philosophy document and working out just how many man hours are required to maintain the course based on the standards that have been set. There's a template which I'll show you in a moment, which is a part of it, which is available through the AGCSA or ASTMA, and it gives the ability to give a thorough analysis of the labour and maintenance required on your course, and will provide you with an idea of how many man hours you need to maintain the course. So there's a small snapshot of it there. It's quite an extensive document, but you can work out how many staff you currently have, your total man hours available, subtract your annual leave, your sick leave, and will give you your actual hours. And as you go through and populate the document with the number of staff required for the job, how much time it takes, the frequency per week, it'll automatically calculate the man hours per week, the frequency per year, the total man hours required, and the percentage of effort for that particular task overall, and then we'll break it down into each category for you. So it's a really good process to go through, and I strongly recommend you working through it even yourself. It gives you a really good idea of just how many hours that you're in deficit or how much extra work you do that you aren't really aware of. Then you're able to then transfer that basically into a very basic graph of the broken down areas, and gives you an idea of just what percentage of effort goes into each area on the course. I wouldn't recommend distributing the graph or the spreadsheet to committees and so on, because you'll inevitably get people that will nitpick the hours on every one. You need to give yourself enough wiggle room in those. But this is a good way of then showing people just where the effort is and where it goes, and a good idea. And it's going to vary for every single golf course, simply based on the setup and how many bunkers you have, etc., etc. Some other visual communication tools: photographs, aerial photographs. Using drones can be an excellent way of communicating complex issues. Here's a drone shot from using our drone and an NDVI image. You can see in the photo that there's some yellowing or bronzing, which is clear. It's from black layer on the green here. And then it's shown up in the NDVI image clearly as where the areas of red are poor health or stress. Can also be used for showing wear patterns on fairways and so on, and really good visual aids to help with communication. Right, I'm on the last couple of slides here now. The role of a superintendent's changed dramatically over the last decade. We're no longer working in individual silos throughout the club. Superintendent has far more responsibility now in conforming to regulations, managing staff, planning, programming, budgeting, managing contractors, conducting research, selecting equipment. Communication is one of the issues that most superintendents tend to struggle with. The job's no longer just about managing turf. We all require excellent communication skills to ensure that we're getting our messages across. A statement there that I pinched from another article, but I really like it, that more superintendents lose their jobs over an inability to communicate than an inability to grow turf. It really shows that growing turf is the easy part of the job. Communication is one of the most difficult parts, and being able to educate people and collecting data and using scientific information as a backup is an excellent way of getting your point across and communicating. Anyone that wishes to contact me or any of the other AgriTech staff would be more than happy to help you or guide you through this process, but I strongly urge you doing a review of your maintenance program and taking a critical look at what changes are achievable in your particular situation, identifying your course's strengths and weaknesses, and focus on the key points that will assist you to provide a year-round good quality surface. Set up appropriate maintenance standards and use data and science to back up your points when getting them across to get your requirements across the line. Feel free to contact the staff at any stage if you just even want to chat. And that's it, and I'll say thank you. And I'll head back to Mark if there's any questions.
Thank you, Bruce. So if there are any questions, please feel free to type those into the chat function. Or similar to the previous webinars that we've had, if there are some questions that arise either after this webinar or over the next week or two as you start working through some of the benchmarking or analysis of your course, feel free to email those through to Bruce, as you mentioned, or any of the guys from the AgriTech team, so Tim or Steve, and we'll make sure to get back to you. But if at the moment, if there are any questions, please feel free to use the chat function. But I do have one question that I might ask you, Bruce. With your work that you've undertaken over the last couple of years, there's a large number of courses that you've consulted to around this sort of approach with understanding the benchmarking to capture the data, then utilize that data over to those discussions with your course team, committees, boards, members, and those sorts of things. So from your experience of all those courses that you've consulted with around this, what would be the first couple of steps that you'd recommend that supers or their teams should undertake if they're interested in then having a look at benchmarking their course?
Most superintendents probably know what the issues are within their course. It's probably putting some figures around those issues, and it's then really easy. It actually confirms in your mind then what you're thinking is actually correct. So looking at the thatch depth on every single green, maybe selecting a couple of greens to do a loss on ignition test will then give you the figures. It can be incredible what you think organic content is, and then when what it actually is can be quite different. We've got a couple of clubs that every 2 years will do a loss on ignition on every single green. That's quite expensive, but they also have extensive dusting programs and so on. So they're monitoring to make sure that it's working. Doing some measurements around the green performance, infiltration rates. That can be simply done with a piece of PVC drainage pipe to just get an idea of how many mil an hour your greens are draining at, and just how much effect the thatch is actually having on the performance of the greens.
Yep, lovely. And you also mentioned that the slide pack will be available to those on the call and to members. So head to the website following this. And also some of those guides that you mentioned as well are available in the turf management resources section. But again, for those who need to, please contact Bruce, Tim, or Steve. Well, that might be it for today. We are right on time. So thank you everybody for attending. Just a quick note to let you know that next week's webinar is now up and available for registrations. Next week on the 28th of July, we will have Dr. Phil Ford presenting. So his presentation will be around being prepared to transition from winter to spring and preparing yourself for summer for both warm and cool season grasses. So registration for Dr. Ford's webinar is now available on the website. And again, please join me in thanking Bruce Macphee for his time and his presentation around benchmarking. So thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody.